The air in the penthouse was a carefully curated temperature, chilled just enough to keep the champagne cold and the conversations sharp. Elara straightened the cuff of her silk blouse, a whisper of fabric against her skin. Everything was perfect. The view of the city's electric heart pulsed through the floor-to-ceiling glass, a silent testament to her position at its apex. The guests were a collection of assets, handpicked for their influence, their net worth, their utility. Tonight was not a party, it was a merger. Her engagement to Julian was the final elegant clause in a contract that secured her future and solidified his. Julian moved through the crowd with an easy grace she had once mistaken for confidence. He was handsome in the way of a magazine advertisement, all polished surfaces and a practiced smile. His company, a tech venture she understood in terms of its soaring stock projections, was his identity, and tonight that identity was fusing with hers. A soft chime from the private elevator interrupted the curated hum of conversation. Her assistant, Anya, materialized at her elbow, her expression a carefully neutral mask. Anya spoke in a low tone, meant only for her. "There is a man at the service entrance. He says he is your uncle." Elara's spine went rigid. The blood in her veins felt like ice water. Caleb. The name was a splinter, a piece of a past she had meticulously sanded away. A past of dirt under the fingernails, of worn-out boots and the smell of hay. A past that had no place here. She gave Anya a sharp, dismissive wave. "Tell him it is not a good time. Tell him anything. Make him leave." Anya hesitated, a flicker of something human in her professional gaze. "He has a child with him, a little girl." The splinter twisted. Elara's jaw tightened. The presence of a child made it worse, a more potent symbol of the unrefined world she had clawed her way out of. She walked past the shimmering guests, her heels clicking on the marble floor like tiny, angry hammers. She did not use the main corridor but a side passage, one that led to the service areas, the building's hidden arteries. The contrast was jarring. The warm, low light of the party gave way to the sterile, white glare of a utility hall, and there he stood, Caleb. He looked just as she remembered, which was the problem. His flannel shirt was clean but faded. His jeans were worn from work, not from fashion. His hands, which she remembered as being impossibly strong and gentle, were calloused and clasped in front of him. He held the hand of a small girl with wide, curious eyes and a braid of brown hair, Lily. He had written her a letter about Lily, a single, handwritten page she had read and then immediately filed away. He looked at Elara, and his face held no judgment, only a quiet sort of recognition. He had driven 4 hours. He told her he got her invitation. Elara had not sent him one. Her mother must have. A sentimental gesture Elara would have to manage later. "Caleb," she began, her voice colder than she intended. "This is not the right time. It is a formal event." His gaze swept over her, not with envy, but with a strange, sad appraisal, as if he were looking at a piece of furniture that was beautiful, but entirely without comfort. He nodded slowly. He understood. He did not argue. He did not plead. He simply accepted her verdict. That acceptance was more damning than any protest. He turned to the little girl. "It seems we came on the wrong day, Lilybug." The girl's face fell, but she did not cry. She just looked at Elara, her expression one of pure, unclouded confusion. As Caleb turned to lead the child away, a figure appeared at the end of the hall, Julian. His smile was fixed, but his eyes darted from Elara to Caleb. "Darling," he called out, his voice a little too loud, "is everything all right?" Elara moved to block his view, a reflexive gesture to hide her shame. "It is nothing, just a misunderstanding." But Julian's gaze was locked on Caleb. His practiced smile dissolved. The color drained from his face, leaving a sickly, pale sheen under the fluorescent lights. He looked as if he had seen a ghost. A very specific, very terrifying ghost. He took a half step forward, his mouth slightly agape. "Mr. Thorne?" Caleb stopped. He turned his head slowly, his expression unreadable. The name hung in the sterile air, utterly alien. Thorn was his wife's name, her maiden name. He had not used it in years. Julian's voice was a choked whisper. "What are you doing here?" Elara stared at him, bewildered. She had never seen him lose his composure. Never. "Julian, what are you talking about?" she asked. "This is my uncle, Caleb." Julian's eyes were wide with a frantic, dawning horror. He looked from the simple man in the flannel shirt to Elara and back again. The gears of his mind were grinding, stripping themselves bare. He ignored her completely. His focus was entirely on Caleb, who now stood with the quiet stillness of a mountain. Julian stammered, taking another shaky step. "I do not understand." Caleb's gaze was flat. He gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head, a clear signal. "Do not speak." Julian froze, his hand half raised as if in supplication. He understood the signal. The blood returned to his face in a painful, blotchy rush. He looked at Elara, at the woman who had just turned this man away from her door, the man he knew only as a name on a wire transfer. A phantom, a legend in the quiet corners of high finance, known only as Thorn, the anonymous, impossibly shrewd investor who had appeared from nowhere 6 months ago and single-handedly kept Julian's company from imploding. He had turned her own blood away from her door, a man she deemed too common for her perfect life. Her groom went pale. That man was the anonymous titan of industry, keeping his entire world from collapsing. And she had just sent him away. The silence in the hallway was absolute. It was a vacuum pulling all the sound from the party beyond the door. Julian stared, his breath caught in his throat. Caleb simply held his daughter's hand, his knuckles white. He gave Elara one last look. It was not angry. It was not hurt. It was final. Then he turned and walked away, his worn boots making no sound on the polished concrete floor. The little girl glanced back once, her eyes wide and dark. Then they were gone. The door to the service elevator sighed shut. Julian finally moved. He spun on Elara, his face a mask of raw panic. "What did you do?" he hissed, his voice cracking, his fingers dug into her arm. Elara flinched, shocked by the sudden violence in his grip. "I told you it was my uncle. He doesn't belong here." He laughed, a sharp, ugly sound devoid of any humor. "Your uncle?" He let go of her arm as if burned, staggering back a step. "That man, Elara. That man is everything." He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, ruining it. He paced the narrow hall like a caged animal. "We are finished. Do you understand? Finished." The word was a stone thrown into the placid pool of her evening. Elara stared at him, her mind struggling to connect the dots. The man in the flannel shirt, Mr. Thorn. The name Julian had used, the absolute terror in Julian's eyes. It made no sense. Caleb fixed fences. He raised a daughter on a small plot of land that was worth next to nothing. He was the ghost of a life she had escaped. "Julian," she said, her voice regaining its steady, authoritative tone. "Explain yourself now." He stopped pacing and looked at her, his eyes wild. "Explain? There is nothing to explain. You have to fix this. Call him, apologize, beg him to come back." The command in his voice grated against her. No one told her to beg. "I will do no such thing," she stated, her pride a shield. "I do not even have his number." Julian looked at her as if she were a stranger, as if she were an idiot. "Find it. Find him." He grabbed her by the shoulders, his desperation overriding all pretense. "Elara, you do not understand what is at stake. My company, everything I have built, it all depends on him." Her mind, trained to analyze data and risk, started to work. She pushed him away, her expression hardening into the one she used in the boardroom. "You told me your company was thriving. You told the board your second quarter projections were unprecedented." He flinched. He looked away. That was the answer. It was all a lie. The successful tech mogul was a facade. The soaring stock was an illusion, and somehow her quiet, rural uncle was the one holding the strings. The mystery was no longer about Caleb. It was about Julian. She turned and walked back toward the party, leaving him standing alone in the harsh, white light of the hallway. The curated hum of the room felt false now, the laughter thin and brittle. She saw the faces of investors, of board members, of her father. All of them had bought into the image of Julian, an image that was, apparently, a hologram. Her focus shifted. The embarrassment she had felt was replaced by a cold, sharp curiosity. A problem had presented itself. And Elara solved problems. She found Anya by the bar. "I need to leave," she said quietly. "Make my excuses, a migraine." Anya nodded, her face impassive. "Of course. And Anya, find out where my uncle lives. The exact address. I know it is in a town called Northwood. I need it in the next 10 minutes. Anya's fingers were already moving on her phone. "Consider it done." Elara retreated to her private study, the one room in the penthouse that was not for show. It was a fortress of data and control. On her desk, under a stack of financial reports, was a small, crudely carved wooden bird. It had arrived in the mail a week ago, tucked into the envelope with Caleb's letter. She had dismissed it as sentimental clutter. Now she picked it up. It was surprisingly heavy, carved from a dark, dense wood. The lines were simple but sure. It felt warm in her hand, real. A message chimed on her phone, a map pin, an address on a road with no name, just a route number. She looked from the map to the small bird in her hand. One was a grid of calculated points. The other was a thing of substance. For the first time, she felt the urge to understand the substance. She changed out of her silk blouse and tailored trousers, putting on jeans and a sweater that felt alien in her own closet. She bypassed the party, taking the service elevator down to the garage. Her car was a sleek, silver import, a silent electric predator. It felt wrong. She drove out of the city, leaving the grid of lights behind. The further she drove, the darker the world became. The highway streetlights gave way to lonely stretches of road marked only by reflective posts. She was moving off the map into a territory she did not understand. A territory ruled by men like Caleb. The thought was no longer embarrassing. It was unsettling. It was intriguing. The paved road turned to gravel. Her car's sophisticated navigation system announced it had lost its signal. She was flying blind, guided only by memory and the last image on her phone. She found the turnoff, a dirt lane marked by a simple wooden sign with the name Blackwood carved into it. Not Northwood. Anya's information had been close, but not perfect. The lane was long and rutted, bordered by old stone walls and towering trees that blotted out the stars. At the end of it stood a house. It was a simple farmhouse, sturdy and unadorned. A single light burned in a downstairs window. A plume of smoke rose from the chimney, a pale ribbon against the black sky. She parked her car, the quiet hum of its engine, an intrusion in the profound silence. She got out. The air was cold and smelled of damp earth and wood smoke. It was the smell of her childhood summers. A dog started barking from inside the house. The porch light flicked on, casting a warm yellow glow. The door opened. Caleb stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the light. He was not surprised to see her. He just waited. Elara walked up the worn wooden steps. Her expensive boots feeling clumsy and loud, she stopped in front of him. She did not know what to say. An apology felt too small. A demand felt absurd. So she said the only thing that felt true. "Who is Mr. Thorne?" Caleb looked at her for a long moment. His gaze was heavy, as if weighing her, judging her sincerity. He stepped back, holding the door open. "Come inside, Elara. It is cold out." The inside of the house was the opposite of her penthouse. It was warm, filled with the scent of burning oak and something baking. The furniture was old, made of dark wood and polished with use. Bookshelves overflowed. Handmade quilts were draped over the backs of chairs. It was not a space designed to be looked at. It was a space designed to be lived in. On the mantelpiece, above a crackling fire, sat a small, carved wooden bird, identical to the one in her pocket. Next to it was a framed photograph of a woman with a kind, intelligent face and eyes the same shade as Lily's, her Aunt Sarah, the woman whose last name was Thorne. Lily was asleep on the sofa, curled under a quilt, her face peaceful. Caleb gestured to a worn armchair by the fire. He moved to the kitchen, which was part of the main room, and poured hot water from a kettle into 2 ceramic mugs. He did not ask what she wanted, he just prepared it. He brought a mug to her. It was simple herbal tea, its warmth seeped into her cold hands. He sat in the chair opposite her, his own mug cradled in his hands. The dog, a large, gentle-looking shepherd mix, laid its head on his knee. Thorne was Sarah's name, he said, his voice quiet. After she died, I started using it for certain things, business things. It helped keep my life here separate. It honored her. He took a sip of his tea. She was the smart one with numbers. I just learned from her. Elara processed this. Her aunt, a woman she barely remembered, a quiet librarian, was the architect of this secret identity. You are the investor in Julian's company. Caleb nodded. Among others. Why? Elara asked, the question sharp. Why him? Why his failing company? Land doesn't rush, Elara, he said, looking into the fire. You watch it, you learn its patterns. You see what is growing and what is rotten. People and their companies are the same. Most people only see what is flowering. They miss what is moving underneath. He looked at her then, his gaze direct. Julian's company is rotten. It has been for a long time, long before him. Then why invest? She pressed. Because sometimes, he said, his voice lowering, you do not prop something up to save it. You do it to get close enough to watch it fall. The words hung in the warm air, cold and heavy as steel. A chill that had nothing to do with the night outside crept over Elara. She was beginning to understand that this was not about money. This was about something else entirely, something that had started long ago. Julian's father, she said, thinking aloud. His father ran Axiom Corp for 30 years. Caleb's face remained impassive, but a muscle in his jaw twitched. That was the only confirmation she needed. Sarah worked there, did not she? In the accounting department, a long time ago. Caleb nodded, his eyes fixed on his late wife's photograph. She found things, discrepancies, numbers that did not add up. It was not just bad accounting. It was fraud. Systematic, deliberate fraud, hidden for years. She was going to report it. He fell silent. The crackle of the fire filled the space between them. What happened? Elara asked softly. They found out, he said. Julian's father, his whole executive team. They did not fire her. They were smarter than that. They started a campaign, legal threats, private investigators, whispers to her colleagues that she was unstable. They buried her in pressure. His voice was flat, a recitation of facts he had gone over 1,000 times in his own mind. She was driving home one night, tired, stressed. A lawyer had called her at the office, threatened to countersue her for corporate espionage if she went to the authorities. She missed a stop sign. He looked at Elara, his eyes clear and hard. They did not put their hands on her, but they killed her all the same. The story settled in the room, a ghost that had been waiting to be acknowledged. Elara finally understood. The shame she had felt at the door of her penthouse was nothing compared to the shame she felt now. Her perfectly curated life, her merger of a marriage, was built on the foundation of this tragedy. She had been about to join the very family, the very system that had destroyed a piece of her own. And Julian? She asked. Does he know? Caleb shook his head. He only knows the company his father built. He inherited the rot, and he cultivated it. He is his father's son. He was leveraging the company to secure loans for himself, hiding losses, cooking the books just like his old man. I was not just an investor. I was a creditor. A very powerful one. My money gave me access. Board minutes. Internal audits. I have been gathering proof. He was about to default. The whole house of cards was going to come down next month. My plan was to be the one who pushed it, but then he announced his engagement to you. Caleb looked at her, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of the immense burden he carried. It complicated things. The simplicity of his world, the quiet warmth of the house, was a lie. It was a base of operations, a command center for a war he had been waging alone for over a decade. Elara stood up. She walked to the mantelpiece and looked at the photo of her aunt, a woman she barely knew, but whose integrity now felt like a debt she had to pay. She turned back to Caleb. Her voice was quiet, but it held a new kind of strength. Not the brittle authority of the boardroom, but something deeper, grounded. "You are not going to push it," she said. "We are." Caleb watched her, his expression shifting from weariness to a cautious, uncertain hope. He saw the change in her, the shedding of a skin. The transactional woman from the city was gone. In her place was someone else, someone who looked, for the first time, like Sarah's niece. Elara spent the night in a small guest room under a heavy quilt that smelled of cedar. She did not sleep. She lay awake, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the country, the wind in the trees, the distant call of an owl. The silence of the city was never truly silent. It was a hum of electricity, of traffic, of ambition. This silence was different. It was alive. In the morning she found Caleb in his workshop, a large barn behind the house. The air smelled of sawdust and oil. Tools hung in neat, orderly rows on the walls. It was the most organized space she had ever seen. He was sharpening the blade of a hand plane, his movements economical and precise. Lily sat at a small, child-sized workbench, carefully sanding a block of wood. She looked up as Elara entered and gave her a small, shy smile. Caleb did not stop his work. He finished sharpening the blade, tested its edge with his thumb, and then looked at her. "There is coffee on the stove." It was not a question or an offer. It was a statement of fact. Elara poured herself a mug. It was black and strong. She stood in the doorway of the workshop, watching them. The quiet companionship between father and daughter, the shared focus on a simple, tangible task. This was his world, not of poverty, but of purpose. He had built a life here, a fortress of principle. "Julian called," she said, holding up her phone, 13 times, and sent 24 texts. "He is frantic. He is offering to fly here. He wants to talk to you." Caleb set the plane down on his workbench. There is nothing to talk about. He knows what he has done. He just does not want to face the consequences. He thinks he can manage me, the way his father managed Sarah. He picked up a thick, leather-bound folder from a shelf. He wiped the sawdust from its cover with his hand. He held it out to her. "This is everything. Sarah's original notes. My own research. Internal documents from his company that his own lawyers do not know I have. It is the story of 2 decades of theft." Elara took the folder. It was heavy. The weight of it was more than paper. It was the weight of a life. "What was your plan?" she asked. "To trigger a margin call," he said simply. "With my position as the primary investor, I could pull my funding on a technicality in the loan agreement. It would cause a cascade. The whole thing would collapse in a day. He would be ruined. But the company would go into bankruptcy. The employees, the smaller investors, they would all lose. It is a blunt instrument," Caleb admitted. "But it is the only one I had." Elara opened the folder. She saw spreadsheets, copies of bank statements, and pages of handwritten notes in her aunt's elegant script. Her corporate mind, the part of her that was cold and analytical, kicked into gear. She saw patterns. She saw vulnerabilities. She saw a path, a more precise one. "This is not just a blunt instrument," she said, her voice low with concentration. "This is a scalpel. You do not have to demolish the building to get rid of the rot. You can cut it out." She looked up from the pages, her eyes alight with a fire Caleb had not seen before. "He wants to talk. Let us give him a meeting. Not here. On my territory. In a boardroom." A few days later, the meeting was set. An emergency session of the board of directors for Julian's company. Elara had used her status as his fiancée and a significant family name in the financial world to call it. Julian had agreed, relieved. He thought it was a negotiation. He thought she was fixing his mistake. He thought she was on his side. Elara flew back to the city, but she did not go to her penthouse. She checked into a nondescript business hotel. She spent 48 hours with Anya and a team of forensic accountants she hired, paying them out of her own pocket. They took Caleb's folder and transformed it from a story of revenge into an airtight legal case. They cross-referenced every note from Sarah with public filings and the internal documents Caleb had procured. They built a timeline, a map of the fraud. On the morning of the meeting, Elara dressed in a simple dark grey suit. It was armor, but a different kind than she was used to. It was not for projecting power, it was for wielding truth. Caleb arrived at the hotel an hour before the meeting. He wore a tweed jacket that was old but well kept, and a simple button-down shirt. He looked like a visiting professor, unassuming and academic. He carried a small, worn leather briefcase. Lily was not with him. He had left her with a neighbor, an elderly man named Silas, who had known Sarah. "Are you ready?" he asked Elara. She nodded. For the first time in a long time, she felt completely clear about what she was about to do. There was no calculation of profit or loss. There was only right and wrong. They walked into the boardroom together. It was a space Elara knew well. Glass, steel, and polished mahogany. A room designed for intimidation. Julian was already there, flanked by his lawyers. The other board members, a collection of grey-haired, complacent men, were seated around the table. When Julian saw Caleb, his face flooded with relief. He rushed forward, hand extended. "Mr. Thorne, thank you for coming. There has been a terrible misunderstanding." Caleb did not take his hand. He simply walked to the empty chair beside Elara and sat down. He placed his old briefcase on the table. The gesture was quiet, but it silenced the room. Julian's smile faltered. He looked at Elara, expecting her to smooth things over. Elara did not look at him. She looked at the head of the board. "I called this meeting," she said, her voice calm and steady, "because I have uncovered evidence of significant, long-term financial misconduct within this company, originating under the previous leadership and continuing to this day." A murmur went through the room. Julian's face went from confused to alarmed. "Elara, what is this? This is not what we discussed." "We discussed nothing, Julian," she replied coolly. She nodded to Anya, who began distributing thick binders to everyone at the table, everyone except Julian. "Inside these binders, you will find a complete forensic analysis of the company's finances for the past 15 years. You will find evidence of shell corporations, falsified earnings reports, and embezzlement on a massive scale." Julian stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is absurd. She is my fiancée. This is some kind of personal dispute." He looked desperately at the board members, who were now flipping through the binders with growing horror. "I am not your fiancée, Julian," Elara said, her voice cutting through his panic. "That arrangement is terminated." She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw nothing but a hollow man, a cheap imitation of power. "And this is not personal, it is business, the business of truth." She systematically, methodically, walked the board through the fraud. She used their own language: liabilities, assets, fiduciary duty, shareholder value. She showed them how Julian and his father before him had been stealing from their own company, from them, for years. She did not raise her voice. She did not show emotion. She simply presented the facts. The facts were devastating. Julian sank back into his chair, his face ashen. His lawyers whispered frantically to him, but he did not seem to hear. He was watching Caleb. Caleb had not said a word. He just sat there, a silent witness. "The source of this information?" an old board member asked, his voice shaking slightly. "Much of the initial discovery was made over a decade ago," Elara explained, "by an employee in your accounting department. Her name was Sarah Thorne. A few of the older members shifted uncomfortably. They remembered the name. They remembered the scandal that was quickly and quietly buried. She was preparing to bring her findings to the authorities when she was subjected to a campaign of intimidation and harassment by the CEO at the time, Julian's father, she continued. She died before she could. Elara paused, letting the weight of that statement settle. Her evidence, however, did not die. She looked at Caleb. It has been held in trust. Caleb finally spoke. His voice was not loud, but it carried to every corner of the room. He looked directly at Julian. My investment was not a vote of confidence, he said. It was the purchase of a front-row seat. I was waiting for you to get comfortable, to get greedy, to make the same mistakes your father made. And you did. The room was silent. The polished world of the boardroom had been shattered. The truth, raw and unvarnished, had taken its place. Elara made the final move. I am exercising the clauses attached to Mr. Thorne's controlling investment, she announced, and as a board member, I move for the immediate removal of Julian as CEO and chairman, pending a full criminal investigation. A hand went up, then another. The vote was unanimous. It was over in minutes. Julian did not protest. He seemed to have shrunk, all the air let out of him. He was escorted from the room by security, a man who had lost everything because he never truly owned it in the first place. The aftermath was a controlled storm. Elara worked with the remaining board to stabilize the company. They issued a press release, transparent and direct. They self-reported to the financial authorities. She did not do it to save the company's reputation. She did it to protect the employees, the people who had done honest work under a corrupt system. Her final act as a consultant to the board was to propose the creation of a foundation, the Sarah Thorne Foundation for Corporate Ethics. It would be funded by the assets seized from Julian and his father's hidden accounts. Its mission would be to protect and legally support whistleblowers. The board, eager to distance themselves from the scandal and create a narrative of redemption, agreed immediately. 2 weeks later, Elara stood in her penthouse for the last time. It was empty. The art was gone. The designer furniture sold. The view of the city no longer looked like power. It looked like a cage. She had submitted her resignation from her father's firm that morning. She sold her portfolio, liquidated her assets, and funneled a significant portion into the new foundation. She kept only what she needed. Anya came to see her off. She handed Elara a final folder. Your new life, she said with a small, rare smile. Inside was the deed to a small plot of land with a cabin on it, about 20 miles from Caleb's farm, and the keys to a sturdy, unspectacular pickup truck. Where will you go? Anya asked. I am going home, Elara said. Though she had never lived there a day in her life, she drove out of the city, not looking back. The truck felt solid and capable under her hands. She followed the familiar route, the road that led from pavement to gravel to dirt. When she pulled up the lane to Caleb's farm, he was on the porch, fixing a loose railing. He did not act surprised. He just straightened up and watched her approach, a hammer in his hand. She got out of the truck and walked up the steps. The silence between them was not awkward. It was comfortable. The railing is loose, he said, stating the obvious. I see that, she replied. Lily came running out of the house, a sandwich in her hand. She stopped when she saw Elara. Then she broke into a wide grin and ran to her, hugging her legs. Elara froze for a second, unused to the casual, unconditional affection. Then slowly she rested a hand on the girl's head. Lily held up the sandwich. It is for you, I made it. It was peanut butter and jelly, slightly squashed. It was the most valuable thing Elara had been offered in years. She took it. Thank you, Lily. Caleb watched them, a faint, genuine smile touching his lips for the first time. He turned his attention back to the railing. There is a section of the stone wall down by the west pasture that collapsed in the last rain, he said, not looking at her. It is a big job. 2 people would make it easier. It was not a question, it was an invitation, the start of a new kind of work. The next day, they stood before the collapsed wall. Stones lay jumbled on the damp earth. It was a mess, a break in a line that had stood for 100 years. Lily was there, gathering smaller stones in a bucket. Caleb showed Elara how to sort the rocks, how to find the right shape, the right weight, how to see the puzzle in 3 dimensions. Her hands, accustomed to keyboards and touchscreens, felt clumsy and soft. She fumbled a large stone, scraping her knuckles. She did not even notice until Caleb gently took her hand. He pointed to the scrape. "You will get used to it," he said. His thumb brushed against her skin. It was a simple, practical gesture. It was the most intimate touch she had ever felt. He showed her how to place the first foundation stone, how to seat it deep in the earth so it would not move. "This is the most important one," he said. "Everything else builds on this." They worked side by side in the quiet afternoon, the only sounds the clink of stone on stone and the murmur of the wind. Lily brought Elara a drawing she had made, a wobbly picture of 3 figures, tall, one medium, one small, standing beside a wall. Elara took it with her dirty hands and smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the field, they placed the last stone on the top layer. The wall was whole again. It was not perfect. It was scarred and patched, but it was strong. They stood there for a moment, looking at their work. Caleb, Elara, and Lily. A silent partnership, a new foundation. Some fences are built to keep things out. Others are built to hold things in. But the best ones, the ones built by hand, stone by stone, simply mark the place where a new life begins.